Now going to. Perfect.
Okay, and then Kathy, I'm going to hand over the screen to you. You can unmute yourself.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thanks so much for having me here this evening. My name is Kathy Puskar with the law firm of Walsh Colucci, and I am representing the applicant, which is an entity associated with Bonaventure, on this application for redevelopment of 2525 Mount Vernon Avenue. I see a lot of familiar faces here and recognize a lot of names. So living in Delray, I understand the importance and interest in this project. As I mentioned to you the first time we met, it's an iterative project, right? The process is iterative. Step one was the concept one submission, which we submitted and received comments from the city on that submission. And many of you weighed in about questions, comments, concerns, and support for the project. So there are a number of views on the project, but as I mentioned, it's iterative, and we continue to do our work to try and work with you as residents of Delray to address concerns and issues, and hopefully get to a point where we have a project that everyone can be proud of. We do the work through, we just submitted our concept 2 submission last week, and we'll get comments from you all, we'll get comments from the city, and then we'll do our preliminary submission with application. And then there's one more submission after that before we go to public hearing. So we look forward to continuing to discuss this project with you. When I met with you the first time, I did tell you that we were at the concept 1 phase. There were certain questions that I couldn't answer and certain things that you all felt hadn't been addressed yet. And so I'm going to walk you through a presentation where you can hopefully see a number of changes that we've made in response to your comments and to comments that have been made by city staff. We have actually read all of the comments that have come in and kind of tried to figure out the different buckets that those comments have fit into. And so hopefully you'll see some changes tonight in response to those concerns. So I'm going to ask Chrissy to pull up the presentation for me. Okay, and let's get it full page and go to the next, Chrissy. It looks like it's not filling the whole page. Do we have it in PowerPoint?
I don't. Hold on. Give me 1 second. How's that?
Let's see. Yeah, that's better. Thank you very much. I think that's going to be easier for people to see as we go through the presentation. Okay, so on the left, you'll see the original design that we had in front of you previously. And on the right, you'll see the new design. You'll see that we pulled the building back along Mount Ida. And we also increased the setbacks along Mount Vernon, Stewart, and Mount Ida. And so we have increased the setbacks to meet the requirements of the plan. And specifically, hold on, I'm trying to find it. The setback along Mount Vernon used to be 9 feet. It's now 12.1 feet. Along Mount Ida, it used to be 7.5 feet, and now it's 10.7 feet. And on Stewart, it used to be 9 feet, and now it is 10 feet. So we have increased that setback. Next. This is an exhibit that shows you in terms of the existing building footprint, where the existing building sits today. It's entirely along the property line with our neighbors on Stewart Avenue, and then is pushed back somewhat along Mount Ida. So you'll see here where that red zone is. That is where the building footprint is being pushed back 10 feet away from our neighbors and then extended slightly along Mount Ida. Next. So some other things that you'll notice that we've changed since the last time we met is, once again, we pushed the building back along Mount Ida. So you see that significant open space on the right there. We have added shrubs and trees to buffer our neighbors along Stewart, and we're also proposing a fence to buffer those neighbors from the building. Along Mount Ida, we have shifted the parking from the south side of Mount Ida to the north side of Mount Ida at the city's request. We have also added a lay-by on Stewart Avenue for pull off for the loading for the retail. Once again, the staff had asked us, and I think people in our meetings had mentioned how they wanted us to get the loading off of Mount Vernon Avenue. So the loading will now be on Stewart. We have two entrances, and I'll show you those when we get to the floor plans. But in terms of Mount Ida, before we had the street trees at the street and the behind, we have since been able to relocate the street trees behind the sidewalk. And we were able to do that by relocating the storm sewer that is in Mount Ida. We have relocated that storm sewer into the street. So the storm sewer is being relocated from the sidewalk into the street, and we are upsizing that pipe from 15 inches to 18 inches. We received a number of comments about being concerned about stormwater and stormwater runoff and stormwater treatment. And so the upsizing of that pipe is not related to the size of this building or the impacts of this building. The upsizing of that pipe is an additional community benefit. Since we have to relocate the pipe anyways, we're working with staff to upgrade that pipe to help as they continue to do infrastructure improvements to address stormwater concerns in the area. The other thing we are doing in relation to stormwater, which is not related to our building, but once again, understanding issues in the neighborhood, is we will be providing additional 20% detention beyond the required amount of detention for the 10-year, 24-hour storm. So we will be providing additional detention on site, which will happen kind of below that open space area, which will take in more of that water in a heavy storm and release it at a slower rate. And once again, that's beyond the requirements of our development, but done as an effort to help mitigate existing issues in the neighborhood. Next. So in looking at the floor plan and some of the other changes we've made, you can see here that we have once again changed the footprint of the building, and we have reduced the number of units from 79 units to 73 units. We have reduced the size of the building. So the residential square footage has gone from 75,970 square feet to 63,200 square feet. And we have reduced the retail square footage from 12,530 square feet to 8,800 square feet. You'll also see the minimum parking required on the prior plan was 85 parking spaces. The minimum parking requirement for the new plan is 70 parking spaces. And looking at this exhibit, you can also see on the right how we have added a corridor on Mount Ida that's near the corner of Mount Vernon Avenue. And that is where residential move in and move out will occur. There is an elevator core right behind that hallway. So on street, since we will have parking on street on the north side of that building, that's where residential load and unload will happen for people moving in and out of their buildings or receiving deliveries. And then you'll see the main entrance to the residential farther down Mount Ida, and that will be the main access point to the building for the residents. Along Stewart, you'll see a trash room that is adjacent to Stewart, and coming out from that trash room, that is where the lay-by will be for the truck to pull off of Stewart to accept the trash in that location. Trash will occur by a private collector typically for a building like this, and will be done as needed to service both the retail and the residential building. Since we don't know who the retailer will be yet, it could conceivably be a couple of different tenants. The amount of trash will obviously be dictated by the type of retail. We would envision a restaurant or two, or maybe some other type of retail. So we don't know the exact amount of trash, but all trash will be handled through that corridor inside the building and then taken out by the truck and by the trash collection, and then put back into that space. That is also where retail deliveries will occur. Next. This is just going up the building once again to show you that we have a 10-foot setback from our neighbors along Stewart for the first and second floors. When we get to the third and fourth floor, that setback becomes 20 feet. And so you'll see that green area, which is terrace area, that is an additional setback to the building above the second floor as we move farther away from our adjacent neighbors. Next. And that's the 4th floor. Once again, step back is similar to the 3rd floor. Next. In talking about the parking, because of the footprint of this building, it does not make practical sense to put parking below the building, nor should we have to. I know that the plan talks about for projects of a certain size, putting the parking below the building on site. In this particular instance, though, the zoning ordinance also acknowledges that when you have parking lots that are immediately across the street from the building, that you can use those adjacent parking lots to serve as parking for the building. So in this instance, we are asking a modification. We don't think it makes sense to put parking under this building. Were we to do so, we would have a situation similar to 1800 Mount Vernon, where you would have a big curb cut and opening for a parking garage that would not meet the number of parking spaces we need for the building, would completely eat up the retail or impact the residential layout. So we are proposing to put that parking across the street. Now, what you see here is the parking layout across the street at the 2401 block, which is behind Cheeseteak and the Butcher. Today, there are 110 spaces that are dedicated to the Health and Human Services tenant that is currently in 2525 Mount Vernon Avenue. So what will happen is that tenant will now be leaving 2525 when we redevelop. And so what we are proposing to do, instead of having these 110 spaces that are dedicated, and remember, this is a private parking lot. I know the public likes to think this is a public lot and you all have the benefit of using those 33 shared retail parking spaces, but it is a private parking lot. So it is an amenity to the community to have use of this parking lot. It certainly serves the tenants in the retail block on 2401, but as we all know, people park there to shop and dine all over the avenue. It's also used for the farmers market on the weekend. So what are we proposing to do? This is what it looks like today. Go to the next slide. We are proposing to provide our residential parking on the lower floor of the parking structure. And then there would be 9 shared space, which would meet the retail requirement across the street. And we would share that with the retail and residential visitors. And then if you look at the top level, where today there are reserved spaces, we would actually have 73 versus the current number. We would have 73 parking spaces that would be available for shared retail use. So the public would be able to use those spaces. Similar, split back one slide, Chrissy. So today there are 33 spaces available for shared retail use, and in tomorrow with this proposal, there would be 73. Next. Here are the exhibits using the ratio setback that's set forth in the plan. Once again, we have an interesting situation here where the projects that are shown in the plan envision that you have a long, narrow lot coming back from Mount Vernon. If you look at those exhibits, similar to what we have on the West Mount Ida side. Clearly, we have a shorter lot on the Stewart Street side. So when you look at that angle of bulk plane, you can see that there is building that goes beyond that bulk plane. Of course, there's building that goes beyond that bulk plane today with the existing building that sits on the property line. But once again, as you move through that bulk plane, we are asking for a modification of that bulk plane. Now, remember, the building that we're proposing is 44.5 feet in height. And so it is very similar to a townhouse building that would be adjacent to single family residences elsewhere in the city. If you look at relationships in Old Town of projects one to another, you often have a taller building next to a single family or shorter building. And this, when we get to that top level, you're now 20 feet away from the neighbors. Next. On the second section, you can see that the building is farther away from the property line, but it has just a corner of that building is clipped in that setback. Next. And looking at the shadow studies we are asked to provide, this is at 8 a.m. in the morning. You can see the comparison and you can see that there is little to no impact from the proposed development on the shadow at 8 a.m. let's look at 4 p.m. or at noon, I believe. At noon, you'll see in December, you will see an impact of that building, but that building meets the setback of the plan. In other words, that side setback beyond the store houses is in compliance with what the code calls for. And you'll see a slight impact between March and September of that side setback. And then let's look at 4:30. Or sorry, 4 p.m. So 4 p.m., you'll see at the top in the existing condition, there's a little bit of light that gets through to our neighbors on Stewart. And it is true in December, by 4 p.m., there will be no light based on the shadows of the building. And then once again, March to September, you can see how that shadow creeps a little bit westward. And then in June, it has a slight impact too from the Mount Vernon Avenue facades. But once again, buildings do locate in relation to one another, and there are impacts, but they are late in the afternoon. Next. So here's the architecture. We got a lot of comments about the architecture, asking us to break up the massing a little bit more, asking us to get rid of the heavy columns on the end of the building, and asking us to get rid of some balconies facing our neighbors. So you can see here changes that we have made to pick up on architecture that we see elsewhere along the avenue. That is also shown in the window patterns and how the doors of the balconies above, you'll see that we added doors with windows on either side to those balconies. Instead of having the doors at the side and lower than the windows, they actually align with the windows, which is more typical of the pattern you would see for this type of building in Del Rey. Next. This is looking on Mount Ida. You can see how the building got shorter here, going farther away to create the open space. We also, we now meet the open space requirement. So we are meeting the 35% ground level open space. Before, I think we met with you, we had 22.6% ground level open space. And so we have increased the amount of ground level open space. We have also met the lot coverage requirements that we did not meet previously. And so by pulling the building back at the street frontages and from Mount Ida, we now are in compliance with those requirements. We also broke up this facade because we heard from people that it looked too long and too same. And so we broke that up. You can see the residential entrance towards Mount Vernon. You can also see that's a secondary entrance. You can also see the entrance by the Mount Ida open space, and how we broke up that facade to break that down into smaller pieces that were varied instead of one consistent facade. Next. Here we are. This is the east elevation. So if you were looking from our Mount Ida neighbor and our Stewart Street neighbor, the darker portion is the closer portion, closer to Mount Ida. And then the shadowed piece would be the piece that you're looking at from the Stewart Avenue neighbors. We, once again, have fixed the windows. You'll see that there are no balconies located on this facade. Those have been removed in this design. And we have also added a register there and windows without a door kind of to that rear there. And once again, along that fence line, we will have trees and a fence. Next. And then this is looking from Stewart Avenue. So from Stewart Avenue, you can see for the retail corner, we've added a significant amount of glass. Once again, we reduced those kind of heavy pillars that were coming down and hitting the ground. And we have put our trash and loading access point on that side as was requested by staff. And then we have amended the elevations that are behind our neighbors on Stewart, once again, to make those more appropriate in scale and design to the type of Art Deco design that we are trying to relate back to. Next. And so once again, here are the renderings. Here's if we are on Mount Ida. You can see now where before we had a sidewalk with tree pits behind it. Now we have tree pits along the street with street trees. Once again, we'll be relocating the parking from the south side of that street to the north side of that street. And we will also be relocating the storm line along Mount Ida. Next. And here we are looking at the intersection of Mount Vernon and Mount Ida. So we have that retail wrapping the corner, which is desirable in the Mount Vernon plan to make sure that we have retail addressing the street and a more pedestrian friendly frontage than the current office building that dips below grade and has a ramp coming out on Mount Ida side. Next. And here we are looking at the corner of Mount Ida and Stewart. Next. And finally, a streetscape along Mount Vernon Avenue. So whereas today, once again, it's just an office building set back from the street with landscaping in front of it, and the building dives down kind of once you go through the front door. Here, we are going to be building a new building that has significant floor to ceiling height for a retail or multiple retail tenants, with the residential above, and then stepping back the residential along Mount Vernon Avenue and Stewart and the rear to provide relief from the street. Next. And this is the final view of the building. Once again, the footprint is similar to what it is today, except that we have pulled the building back from our neighbors. And yes, there is a fourth story, but the 4-story is in proportion to the school across the street from us, and also due to the step backs, respects our adjacent neighbors. We have removed the modification for street requirement from our request. We have removed the modification to ground level open space, and we have removed the modification to lot occupancy. In terms of traffic, the proposed trips on this block, and I'm trying to find those numbers. Today it is 85 trips in the AM, I'm sorry, 65 trips in the AM peak. And with the new proposal, it'll be only 63 trips in the AM peak. I'm sorry, excuse me. In the AM peak, the existing trip generation of the existing use is 65 trips, and the proposed will be 36 trips in the peak hour AM peak. In the evening, the PM peak hour existing today with the office tenant is 63 trips in the peak hour, and the proposed is 44 trips. And then for the existing overall trips during the entire day, the existing is 431, and with the proposed, it will be slightly higher at 460 trips per day. There was reference to 1800 Mount Vernon Avenue. People said that the FAR of that building was smaller than the FAR of this building. Now with the revisions we've made, our FAR is a 1.75. The FAR of 1800 Mount Vernon Avenue was 2.0. People made references to the open space on that project, and the requirement's 25% at ground. In that project, it was 31.2% at ground level, and we have 35% at ground level plus above grade open space. And then let me just tell you, because people may ask, let me look at the unit mix that we're proposing. So we are proposing, hold on one second. Sorry, I'm looking at my notes here. We are proposing 20 studios. That's a reduction in 3 studio units from what we had before. We're proposing 45 1-bedroom units, which is 5 1-bedroom units more than we had before. And we are proposing 8 2-bedroom units, which is 8 2-bedroom units less than we had before. So not only have we changed the overall unit mix, but we have also changed the total number of units from 79 to 73. Next. And I think that may be it. Is that it, Chrissy?
That's the end.
And so if that's it, we can take that down.
Okay. Thank you, Kathy, very much. And I really appreciate you doing the side-by-side throughout the presentation and addressing the comments throughout. That's extremely helpful. I would like to, let's see, Nathan and Carson, you're both on the call somewhere. I'm looking for you. Are you there? Who- um, Hi, Nathan.
Oh,
Would you like to kind of summarize, or could you please summarize just a few things while working with the applicant and addressing some of the concerns that we've, the Delray citizens have had?
sure. We've noted, just as Kathy has received all of your comments, the city has also received and reviewed all of your comments as well. I will say that, we are just starting our review for the concept 2 submission here. All of our departments have yet to have sufficient time to significantly review it. So we don't have any collected comments on this submission yet. Certainly we've been working with the applicant in regard to the parking, the open space, the architecture overall. Certainly we've seen the stormwater concerns, and Kathy has correctly addressed the solutions that have been discussed with staff in that regard. And I think that we're on a good path for the stormwater in particular. Otherwise, I think that the sort of form-based code approach that this team is following is something that is still a point of discussion throughout as how they are achieving this. So that's something that we will continue to work through and review. I'm sure that we'll have comments in this round as well. But I think that, honestly, there's a lot of improvements that this team has made to the proposal thus far. And I say that from our initial look at the documents thus far. We have, as I said, have yet to really take a deep dive into this. If there's specific questions, I can certainly attempt to answer them.
I think one thing that would be very helpful for everyone, because as you know, I mean, the sanitary is a major concern, and I do know that the city is working very hard, and Alex Renew and the city are working hard to correct a lot of the problems that we've had over the years. But is there something that maybe a little something that we could post on the Delray Citizens Association website that sort of highlights as to what this project is doing and what is being done, within our area, that kind of just somewhat of an education type soundbite?
I guess if you're referring to overall stormwater improvements that are being done in the Delray area, I'd have to get from Tess what their work program is for that. Certainly, I think that when we look at this is a building that was the current building was built without many stormwater controls at all. So as Kathy had mentioned, the current commentary from Transportation Environmental Services is that this project will need to provide a 20% improvement above the existing for stormwater quantity and quality. And the pipe infrastructure that Kathy was referring to in improvements is part of what I'll call an iterative process. It does improve the pipe sizing and pipe flow directly adjacent to this building, which is actually a tremendous benefit. And obviously there are pipes further down the road, no pun intended, that will need improvement as well in order to bring the system up to a higher level of service. But this is how we achieve that as a city. When an applicant comes in and we have an opportunity to look at their conditions as well as the impacts that this development is having, that's exactly how we achieve stormwater improvements. So I can work with Tess to see if we can give you sort of a bullet list of what's being asked of this project, as well as plans for overall improvement in the neighborhood.
Okay, that would be wonderful. And actually, I think, let's see, someone has already posted something that I think very, being target specific to this area would be helpful, just for us to highlight on our website. I'd always link back to the city's website, but it would be helpful for something that's dedicated just to us. Kind of makes us feel.
Would it be helpful for me to go through the questions in the chat, or did you want to organize? the
Well, I'm going through, and if you would like, I would, sure, if you want.
I'm happy to just go through them if you want.
Okay.
Yeah, we're
that's-
gonna, excuse me, but we're gonna let the land use committee members go first
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay.
with
Yeah,
any
well,
questions.
some of our land use, I know Sarah has posted several questions in there. But one thing I just want to remind everyone, we want to be specific to 2525. Let's respect everyone's time during this meeting tonight and focus on the project at hand and not get into other logistics in Delray. So.
Sarah, if you want to unmute yourself and ask your questions, I have a couple also, so I'll let Sarah go first.
Right. My first question is about the parking, and I know there's not a desire to put parking on site there, but my concern would be that parking lot somehow that's designated now becomes unavailable. Is it possible to have underground parking on this site?
So we have looked at that, and it is not possible for us to put the parking on site. We could not fit all the parking that's required. And if I tried to put it off of Stewart, then I would have a big parking garage entrance off of Stewart that would take up into the retail core and eat up a lot of the retail and have a parking entrance on Stewart. If I put it on Mount Ida, it would cut into the residential, or it would cut into the open space. And once again, it wouldn't meet the required parking. And we submit that it's not necessary for us to do that, because there's more than sufficient parking across the street to meet the requirements for this use. And we think the better choice for the plan and meeting the kind of the vision of the plan, the better choice would be to have residential units addressing the street on Mount Ida, retail as you turn the corner onto Mount Vernon and onto Stewart, and then being able to just have our trash and loading come out on the Stewart Street side. I see, Sarah, you had asked about also kind of on-street parking reserved for loading on the Stewart Street side. And I don't think we have an exhibit that showed us. I thought we had, but it looks like we had a little bit of confusion in our last minute changes to the presentation, because I'm seeing something in this presentation that looks different than what I looked at earlier. On Stewart Street, on Stewart Avenue, we are proposing to have a lay-by. So it doesn't take away parking on the street, because there isn't parking on the street there right now. There's parking on the property there. But what we are proposing is a lay-by that would allow the trash truck or a truck that's dropping off supplies for the retail to pull into the lay-by and load and unload through that door on Stewart Avenue. On the Mount Ida side, what we are proposing to do based on staff's suggestion is take the parking that is currently located on the south side of Mount Ida and move it to the north side of Mount Ida. And we are proposing a kind of short-term loading, unloading zone to take up a space, not all of the parking spaces on that street, but enough of the space to provide a loading zone so that when people move in and out, or when there are residential deliveries, they can happen on that side.
So 2 questions. What is a lay-by? And then are you only moving the parking in that one block from the north side to the south side to the north side?
Yeah, so Chrissy, can you pull up the plan? And I'm sorry that kind of we were trying to get our revisions of prior and now, and it looks like on the landscape slide, it looks like we lost the lay-by. But if you are to kind of zoom in, Chrissy, on Stewart, I don't think we're going to see it here, but at least you can show an arrow to where it should be, which is if you're on Stewart, go over to the right. Oh, that is there. I'm sorry. My old eyes couldn't see it. Okay, there it is. So if you see on Stewart Avenue, when you turn that corner, can you see the curb line that comes around Mount Vernon?
Yeah.
And then it dips in along that frontage. So it is there. I just couldn't see it on my small computer screen. And so that would allow a truck to pull in here to take out the trash and loading, or to bring in any retail supplies without impacting the flow of traffic on Stewart Avenue. And then go to the other side, Chrissy. And then on the other side where we were proposing, you see this door, Chrissy, if you could point to that secondary residential entrance right there. And we were looking, this arrow isn't quite in the right space. It says proposed residential loading space, but it actually would be kind of a little bit farther up. So you would have some parking, and then you'd have a loading zone so that you could move in and out.
And then the parking would only shift to the other side of the street on this block?
Correct. So you have East Mount Ida, see here, you have parking right now. It's on the south side adjacent to the church. And we're using an existing aerial, so it's hard to show what happens, but the parking will no longer be on that side of Mount Ida. It'll be adjacent to our building on this side of Mount Ida. And then if you go on to Stewart today, I don't know if we have the existing, go back to the existing, Chrissy, on that footprint. I don't know if it even shows up there, that right there. Today, there's like an off-street parking area that is along Stewart Street there. And so we would be doing a loading zone there instead of the parking spaces that start kind of along the street. I think they start kind of right where that car is, because right now there's actual parking on the site at Stewart. Does that make sense?
While we're still on parking, one of the big issues is how is the parking across the street encumbered to this project? And otherwise, what happens?
Go back, yeah, can you go back, Chrissy, to the parking slide about kind of the existing situation? So we have the same owner owns this block, and zoom out a little bit, yep. Owns this block as owns the adjacent block. And so once again today, and as it has been since Health and Human Services has leased the space next door, these two blocks were owned by the same owner. There was a lease in place to protect the 120 spaces for Health and Human Services. A similar lease would be put in place, or in this case, it would be in perpetuity as long as the residential buildings need it. Go to the next slide, Chrissy. For the 61, for the spaces that are below grade in this building. And I also saw a question that somebody asked about ADA parking, and that's a very good question. And I actually don't have an answer to that question tonight. And we'll need to make sure that we can meet the ADA requirements for our residential building at 2525. And so I will either identify below grade spaces that would be ADA compliant, or perhaps we would have to take a space or two that we have marked as available for shared retail to accommodate ADA, but we'll take a look at that in our next iteration.
So Kathy, what you're saying is if Bonaventure ever tried to sell the property across the street, the parking requirements would stay with the residential building.
It would be encumbered by the requirement to provide the parking for the building across the street.
So there's not really a chance that that site could be redeveloped because it could potentially temporarily take away parking.
Well, for those of you that are familiar with the plan, you probably know that there are buildings along that facade along the 2400 block that have been deemed historic and can't be removed. And so while there might be some infill that could have happened along the side streets on the above grade parking level, the below grade parking would likely remain. And if you also know, the city's requirements for retail parking have significantly reduced. And so it wouldn't take 73 parking spaces to meet the retail parking. Now, I'm not aware of any plans to do anything on this block. It operates well as a retail block, and the parking will be available for shared use for other retail in the area. Chrissy, you can take the presentation down now so I can see everybody. It's kind of hard to talk to a presentation. Sorry. So we think that you could potentially do something on that block in the future, but it would not, if you did a full scale redevelopment, you still have those buildings that are shown in the plan to be preserved.
Sarah, is that all your questions?
Sarah.
Yes.
Okay, well, my next question has to do
Yeah,
with
that's all.
the construction and the concerns for safety, and can you kind of talk us through how you envision the site management, the construction management to occur because of the restricted access? There's no staging area. Can you kind of talk us through that?
Well, I'm not sure that that's exactly sure. It's true that there's no staging area because we have an area that currently is a parking lot on that side of Mount Ida that we could use for staging potentially to build the building and construction. But what I can say to you is that I don't have the answers to all the construction details right now. If the project were to get approved, before we can commence construction, we have to do a maintenance of traffic plan and we have to do a phasing plan that walks through the steps of the construction. And as part of that requirement, we are also required to meet with our adjacent neighbors and the community. So we would reach back out to you guys and schedule a meeting to walk through the construction so that everybody understands kind of how it's supposed to operate during construction, truck hauling routes, hours of construction. Here, without a below grade garage, I hope you will see that one benefit is that we have no below grade. We will not be excavating except to demolish and take away the building that's there. But we aren't making a below grade space. So that should make the construction easier. But we would go through all those details prior to commencement of construction with the city review and sign off. And of course, have to work closely with our neighbors on how do we demolish the existing building, right? And not have any impact on their homes. And we would work through that carefully with them.
So you're thinking of having a monitoring system or some type of, way to monitor the surrounding homes?
Well, yes, but although I need to double check because I'm not sure, I don't know that we're doing pile driving on this project. I see Ben shaking his head no. I thought because we're not doing a below grade parking structure, we don't have to drive piles like you would. If we were doing a below grade parking structure, we do pile driving and that's what creates the noise and that's what creates the vibration. Of course, we're going to have to coordinate with them when you demolish a building, right, to make sure that there's nothing that harms their building. So once again, all those details would be worked out as we get closer to construction.
So do the neighbors have an opportunity to give you their input to make sure that you're adjusting your construction activities to address their concerns?
Yes, because we have to have a pre-construction meeting and they will be able to, and also the other thing we have to do is identify an on-site liaison. So whoever, when we're building the project, there would be a dedicated person with an email address and a phone number so that if things aren't going the way they're supposed to be going, if they're not following the rules, then there is a person that they can go to. Of course, you guys know me. You can always come to me. I get calls and emails during construction processes, I have to say, where I have to help kind of get our contractors under control if they're not following the rules, but there will be an on-site liaison. This is an interesting case also because we do have that below grade parking. We can have our construction workers park on 2401 so that they're not parking on the streets during construction because the tenant that's currently in 2525 that has rights to that parking will be gone. So we actually have an advantage that a lot of construction projects don't have when it comes to construction worker parking and staging.
Okay, does anybody else on the land use have any questions?
Wolf, do you have any questions, or Virginia? I think
Annie's on there and Lisa's on there.
Annie and Lisa. Do you have any questions?
This is Annie. I don't.
Okay. And I'm guessing the others don't either. Okay, well, before we, Kathy, before we let you go loose on,
Okay.
there was one question that I'd like to make sure that maybe the city addresses, maybe Nathan, if you could speak to. Someone has asked about the CL zoning and just basically an explanation, just to talk about the density and about the 27 units per acre. That just, give a little summarize what the CL zone is.
Well, I guess that actually explain the form-based code portion to this. So effectively in this area, a developer has a choice. They can either go with the underlying Euclidean zone, which is CL in this case, and utilize the constraints within that, or they can opt to use the form-based code, which this applicant is doing. So the form-based code doesn't prescribe the same methodologies, if you will, as far as same setbacks and the same floor area ratio or density as the CL zone. Instead, it utilizes height setbacks, the 28-degree angle, and other mechanisms to basically create the form of the building. So in that sense, that's the zone or the regulations that they are setting themselves against in this case. So while the CL is there for them to utilize, they've opted not to, and it's really the form-based code that we're reviewing against.
So hopefully I think that answered that question. I hope. Oh. I know it can be kind of tricky whether, we have the opportunity to go for one, to go through one review process or another review. So, okay. And go back, maybe we've addressed the parking. I don't know, Kathy, are you seeing any questions that maybe I'm seeing a lot of things that
I think what might be easiest for me is to just read through them and I can acknowledge the ones I think we've already discussed and maybe answer others so that everyone, at least their question can be heard. And that works for you. Okay.
Yep, that works for
I had
me.
asked about the on-street parking being reserved as a loading zone. I think we discussed that. Kate Morse asked how much additional parking is expected to increase, taking away from current residents. I think I already discussed that the required parking today, there are 110 parking spaces reserved in the parking lot across the street that serve the tenant in this building. In the future, we have a requirement of 70 parking spaces to serve this building, and we are proposing to have those spaces in the same location as the existing tenant spaces. However, it will free up additional spaces to be used for shared retail parking by the public.
If I can interrupt, I just want to point out to everybody that parking is for the residents of the building is unbundled from the parking garage. So tenants aren't required or have to opt in to pay for that parking.
And that's a good point, because the city actually has a policy of requiring the unbundling of parking to encourage people to not have cars, because if you don't have a car, then you don't need a parking space. And I know for some people, it's hard to imagine not having a car. I'm one of those people. I have my car and I may not use it often when I'm walking down to Del Rey, but I do have one. So I appreciate that thought. However, in this building, note that we are building a number of studio units and 1-bedroom units. So we have 20 studios and 45 1-bedroom units and only 8 2-bedroom units. So the idea is that there are people who are carless by choice. There are a number of people who are carless by choice. And as we get more transit opportunities and bike share and the dreaded scooters and Metro at Potomac Yard, we do envision that there will be people who choose to live here who do not have a car. But once again, we have 73 units and we have 70 parking spaces across the street. 61 of those are reserved for the residential building, and 9 of those we anticipate being shared between retail and visitors. Sarah had asked about the opening for underground parking being located on Stewart or Mount Ida. As I mentioned, we looked at all options for doing that. Any parking that we would put below grade would do severe damage to the first floor of this building and create a big hole in the building and still not provide the number of parking spaces we need to provide to serve the building. We are very fortunate in this instance to have an owner that owns both blocks where we can provide the parking across the street while not taking away anything from the community. In fact, we'll be adding something back, which is additional shared retail spaces in that parking lot. Corey Dockman asked about ADA parking spaces being located. Was there a lot on the east side of the plan? And so, as I mentioned earlier, that is a very good question because I don't think I've looked at that yet. And so we will go back and look at that again. Monica asked, what is a bulk plane? Can we go back to that exhibit, Chrissy, looking from Mount Ida or Stewart on the bulk plane? There is a provision in the plan that looks at setbacks from the rear yard. And it states that you have to measure it 5 feet above the ground at the property line. And scroll down, Chrissy, and it has to be at a 28-degree angle. So this is something that the city came up with when they did the plan to look at stepping the building back away from our neighbors. You can see here, it just clips the building. If you go back up to Stewart, Chrissy, on the previous slide, you'll see it clips the building in the existing condition. And it also, you can see here, as we go up the building, you can see how more of the building is within the area of that, or outside of the area of that 28-degree bulk plane. We don't know of a building. I mean, it's to have a building built on that exact angle is really difficult. And in order to get the density that we need to build the project and make it economically viable to redevelop the project, we are asking for a modification of that bulk plane. But once again, remember, today the building is on the property line with the neighbors, and in the future it'll be set back 10 feet at the first 2 levels and an additional 10 feet at the following level. Chrissy, can you close that so I can see the chat again? Whoops, I lost my place. Rod Cookrow, what prevents you from proposing a plan for the building that does not require any modifications from current zoning? Well, Rod, I'm only aware of 2 projects, unless you look at, I can't remember if the Delray Central was, I think that might be in the plan or just outside of the plan, but even 1800 Mount Vernon Avenue had modifications. It's very difficult to build a building that meets every requirement of the plan. The plan was done kind of in abstract. It couldn't take into account the specifics of every single building on Mount Vernon Avenue or every single lot to look at what might be possible. And so when you try to put all those rules in play and redevelop the site, as you'll see, that angle of bulk plane works on Mount Ida because the lot's longer, as was assumed and shown in the plan diagrams. But as you get onto Stewart, that frontage is narrower. And so for this particular property owner, we've got an existing office building. It's an income producing property. I personally don't think it adds to Delray. It does not have ground floor retail. You walk in the door of that building and the next thing you know, you're below grade. If you're on Mount Ida, you're set back and you walk up a ramp to get back to street level. And so in terms of kind of balancing the desires of redeveloping the property to have ground floor retail, pedestrian activated frontage along Mount Ida, Stewart, and Mount Vernon, we are asking for that 4th floor modification. But the reason we're doing that is because if we can't get enough density to make the project work from an economic standpoint, it will not be worth it to demolish what's there today. And they would end up just reletting the building to a new tenant, which, you know, depending upon your position, there are some people who may say, well, leave it as it is. I think most people would like to see more retail, more pedestrian friendly activity, and more opportunities, frankly, for people to live along the avenue. The more residents we have, the more support we have for our local businesses. So there are some trade-offs, but as I mentioned, I hope you all can see some of the revisions that we have made. We took your comments to heart, and we've tried to make revisions to this plan to bring us closer to the requirements of the plan and not need as many modifications. Patrick James, it looks like the properties next to the building will get essentially no light. I don't think that's accurate. I think that there were a couple of instances that I showed, I believe at 4 p.m. Where the impact is definitely greater, but at 8 a.m. and noon, it's not very different from what it is today, but you are correct, at 4 p.m. There is an impact. Sarah Howe asked, do the balconies on the upper floors encroach into the 20-foot setback you mentioned? Yes, so on Mount Vernon Avenue and Stewart, where we have the balconies, they do come forward of the building as balconies, which are architectural features, which are usually encouraged to break up kind of the facade. Kate Morse, is there no setback on the back side on Mount Vernon? That puts a lot of build on looking into our yard. Chrissy, can you go back to the site plan, the proposed? Because I'm not sure I'm understanding that question, but let me show you what we do have. Go back to the 2 slides down, slide 4. So Chrissy, if you could just show, we have a setback from Mount Vernon. Let me go back to my notes. The setback from Mount Vernon is 12.1 feet. We have a setback on Stewart, and the setback on Stewart is 10 feet. We have a setback on Mount Ida, and the setback on Mount Ida is 10.7 feet. And then the setback adjacent to the neighbors, so running kind of from Stewart Street and then along the back of our neighbors on Stewart, that setback is 10 feet, and it runs all the way down that line and across the back of those yards and then out towards Mount Ida. And what we've proposed to do, which we didn't have before, is add plantings, add trees there as a buffer, but also add a new fence along that property line. Okay, Chrissy, you can take that down. Do the balconies remain on the Stewart Avenue facade? Can you go back to the renderings or the elevations? Actually, go to the elevations, I guess. Okay, so on Mount Vernon, Chrissy, pull out so you can see before and now, please. Okay, so you can see on Mount Vernon, we've retained the balconies at that top level, and you'll also see the balcony on Stewart Avenue. And go to the next facades. And this is on the Mount Ida side. Once again, we have balconies along Mount Ida facing the commercial block to our south. Next. So adjacent to our neighbors, you'll see that in the prior plan, we had balconies facing on that top level. We had balconies facing our neighbors, and those balconies have been removed. And then in the last slide, once again, we had balconies facing the neighbors. You can see them on kind of the far right. I'm sorry, the ones on the far right, that one on the far right faces Stewart, and those are still there facing Stewart Avenue to the commercial buildings to the north. But the balconies that were on the side of our building, which is the rear of our neighbors on Stewart, see number 3 at the bottom there, Chrissy, if you could show in the key. So along the, come down to the, right there, along that facade, we used to have balconies. We've removed those balconies facing our neighbors. Okay, you can take that down so I can see the chat. Do you have a rendering from Stewart? So the only rendering we have right now is at the corner of Mount Vernon Avenue in Stewart. Chrissy, can you pull that up? Keep going, keep going. That is the rendering. So this is Stewart that you're looking at from the corner of Mount Vernon and Stewart at that corner. We do not have one coming the other direction. Okay, take that down, Chrissy. Kate Morris has said, given the increased traffic to drop off for the office and entry, is there consideration to make Mount Ida dead end street? No, I have not heard that consideration raised yet. It's still a vehicular street, and we will still have parking adjacent to our building. John Scott gave the 2 hands up emoji. Nate Hurdo, the proposal states that the calculated sanitary sewer outfall will increase by 2.7 times, 34,640 to 94,645. Many residents that live downstream from 2525 have had issues with excreta backup into their homes. When will a detailed analysis of the impact to sanitary sewer capacity be provided? Will that impact analysis detail the complete route to the Commonwealth connector? I don't know the specific answer to your specific question, except to say that when we file our preliminary site plan application, I do believe that there's additional sanitary sewer analysis that needs to be done. I'm not sure if it shows exactly what you're asking for, but we can share that. Or if Ben Flood, if you have anything to add that I'm not saying, that's more your ballywick.
No, you're right. The preliminary site plan will include the detailed sanitary sewer analysis. I don't know the specifics of where the Commonwealth connector is, but the city does have specific limits of analysis that the sewer has to be studied to.
Okay, Rod Cookrow, what is the annual monetary value difference of the project with modifications versus staying within the parameters of the existing allowed zoning? I don't have those exact dollars, and that isn't, I think, public information. However, I can tell you that for Bonaventure, it's really an analysis of, is it worth going forward with redeveloping this property, or should we just leave it as an office building and relet it? And so I don't think it's a project that meets the requirements versus not meeting the requirements. It's, is it worth it to do the project or keep it as it is? And as I said, we've been trying to make modifications to address concerns. This is our second submission. We'll have another submission, and so we'll be collecting comments about the project. And Rod, I'm guessing, and I know you very well, that you just want it to meet every single requirement, and were the world that perfect? It just isn't. You can't do a plan. And by the way, this plan was done years and years and years ago, and very few buildings have been redeveloped under this plan. And that's one of the reasons, is because the requirements are so specific that you have to have modifications in order to allow for the redevelopment that everyone wants. Now, we have to balance interests, right? You're right. We need to work with everyone to try and make sure that we are compatible with the neighborhood, that we're achieving the goals of the plan. But we're trying to do that. And yes, it's not perfect. We do need modifications, but we think on the balance, what we're proposing is reasonable. John Scott, looks way better than before. Thank you for that.
Nice positive.
Yeah. No, it's nice to have one in there every once in a while. Gail Roeder has asked, I think it was mentioned, but what is the height of the Mount Vernon School on the Mount Vernon Avenue side? So I think the height of that building from the sidewalk, right? Because we could just measure it from the street as opposed to average finished grade. What I have is the height of that building is 45.2 feet. Catherine Waynick, the best place to get updates on the city's stormwater program is the Flood Action Alexandria campaign page. And there is a link there that I'm sure the Land Use Committee can share. We have Corey Dockman's question about the density for the CL zoning.
Which we addressed that one.
Address that one. Yeah. Zach Brickhouse, not to mention everyone turning onto Stewart would have to go through the intersection leading to the school. Though still a problem with trash pickup. I'm not exactly sure what that comment is in reference to. I guess all I can tell you is since we, maybe I'm, okay, I get it. I think he's responding to the question that was asked, could you put a parking garage entrance on Stewart? So if you put a parking garage entrance on Stewart, all the cars would filter in and out of a garage on Stewart Street. He says, though, is still a problem with trash pickup, although trash pickup is much less frequent than entering and exiting a garage. Monica, will the lay-by be dedicated to loading, unloading? Yes. Like trash pickup, loading, unloading. Kate Morse, the intersection at Mount Ida and Mount Vernon is dicey now. Pedestrian versus car will be far more hazardous for pedestrians. I'm not sure I understand that comment. So there's an existing parking structure there today. We aren't changing that parking structure. So the same number of cars will enter and exit that parking structure. And we're just putting the parking adjacent to the building on our side of the street. There will be crosswalks. There will be a pedestrian crosswalk. There is one there today that will get our residents over to the retail parking. Skylar Yost, building more parking is a downward spiral for neighborhood main streets. Communities that do that get, quote, worse, close quote, main streets. Glad to see the existing parking being used instead of building more. Patrick McNabb, is there any change to the original affordable housing plan? Have you reconsidered adding any affordable housing units so that public servants and retail works could afford any of these units being offered? So I believe, as I mentioned before, and I mentioned again today, my client plans to be in compliance with the affordable housing plan that contemplates a monetary contribution to affordable housing. So the other thing is that, as I mentioned, we're also proposing a number of studio units. And so those will be smaller units that'll be more affordable. Zach Brickhouse, it seems sort of problematic that Mount Ida is one way and the tenant entrance is half a block up going the wrong way. I'm not sure I understand that comment either, because there's two ways on Mount Ida on either side of the church. You're going one way on the south side and one way on the north. And we are with the flow of traffic, which is why we're putting the parking on our side of the street. So I may be missing your point there, but I don't think this is problematic. It's
If I may interrupt, Kathy, because even though you say, yeah, it's one way on one side and one on the other, if you don't know where that entrance is and you happen to turn on the Oxford Street, because it's really two different streets, and then you realize you have to make a U-turn where the church property is, and then it's a very tight street. Mount Ida is almost a one-way street because of the parking on the side of that street. And I think part of the neighbors' concerns is there's going to be a lot more traffic, people coming and going, and it's going to make living on that portion of Mount Ida down from the building really
So
difficult.
explain that to me. There's a lot more people coming and going than the existing office building, even though the trips are higher for the office building.
Well, I see what you're saying, but what happens, as far as I understand it, is a lot of the people that work in that building park on the street rather than in the parking garage.
Okay.
And because of the narrowness of Mount Ida, if you're trying to turn onto Mount Ida from DeWitt, you have to pull over because you don't have the right of way. And it's just
You're saying farther down Mount Ida.
right, but
Gotcha.
when you want to go up to get to Mount Vernon, you have to go to the light at the corner of the Health and Human Services building. So I think this is really going into getting the city to help look at how that traffic situation really works, and could there be more improvements to it than what you're proposing?
Okay, fair enough. Yeah, I'm trying to picture it because I do.
Right, you have to go stand there and sort of see what happens when, especially if, say, the UPS guy decides to block traffic.
Got it. Okay. All right.
Thanks.
Skylar Yost, that intersection is the only place on the avenue where cars occasionally have right of way over pedestrians, part of why people drive faster down that stretch. Gail Reuter, did I understand you removed the balconies in the back that were overlooking the houses on Stewart? I think we addressed that. Corey Dockman said, thank you. M. Buyer, is there a requirement for affordable housing in this project? As I mentioned, there is an affordable housing policy, and so we will be working through that with the city as we move forward. Brad Simonich, I'm definitely interested in the issues surrounding the calculated sanitary outfall increase and how that would negatively impact many members of the surrounding community. I think we discussed kind of that we will be doing additional analyses as we move forward. MLHN, sorry, how is the construction going to affect the school children while they use the playgrounds, which is close to 2525? So there will be construction during the day in compliance with the city's noise ordinance. But to your point, they'll be on our side of the street. And so there will be construction noise, and every child I've ever known loves to watch construction projects. So for them, they'll have an added entertainment when they're outside at the playground. Brian Collins, I may have missed this. However, what is the plan for landscaping the new property at street level on the perimeter? Chrissy, can you go back to the So you'll see, today, as I mentioned, there's a sidewalk. If you're on Mount Ida, there's a sidewalk that runs along there and like a curbless parking with bollards. We will actually have street trees along that frontage and a sidewalk behind that. And then along Mount Vernon, we're meeting street trees. We have 3 street trees. The reason you don't see them at the corner of Mount Ida and Mount Vernon is because of the bus stop that's there today. So there's a bus stop and then 3 street trees. And then along Stewart, if you scroll up that way, you'll see that we have street trees on either end of that lay-by that's to be used for the retail loading and service, and then the trash for the retail and the residential building. And then let's look over at the open space. We are talking about putting trees in for the neighbors behind at the back of the building here. And then once again, landscaping along that facade. We have a transformer at the corner, which will be in a fence, so it has to be in an enclosure. And then we will have additional improvements to the open space that you see here. It looks pretty blank and open. We do envision some amenities for the residents there, tables and chairs, perhaps a grill, something of that nature. And we'll be looking at that in more detail. Okay, Chrissy. Jen, what is the practical difference between the lay-by and the tenant move-in parking space? Where are Uber drivers and food delivery drivers parking? Is there a no idling restriction in the lay-by? Yes, the city in the noise ordinance, there's a requirement that you cannot idle for more than 10 minutes. So in terms of a pickup drop-off, the truck would have to shut off its engine if it was going to be there more than 10 minutes. The lay-by on the residential side is for move in, move out. It also could be used by the Uber driver, the pizza guy, kind of those short-term trips at the corner of Mount Ida and Mount Vernon. Skylar Yost, and lots of people who are car light. I think some people were putting the comments in as we were talking about the conversation, so they may be a little out of order, but I think this is when we were talking about people who are carless by choice. And Skylar said, lots of people who are car light, lots of families on the north end of the neighborhood only have one car. Zach Brickhouse, is there any permit requirement contemplated for residents for on-street for street parking, or can tenants elect to opt out of the additional payment and park on the streets? So as far as I know, there are no residential parking permit districts around here. Someone can correct me if I'm wrong. So there's no residential permit parking. So just like all of you as residents of Delray can park on the street, I suppose if someone in this building chose that they wanted to risk it and try and find an on-street parking space, they could do that. As we know, parking in Delray on evenings and weekends is tricky. And so I can't tell you that no one wouldn't try and do that. I can just tell you they'd have a really hard time if they relied on-street parking for their everyday parking. Monica, right. Why would you pay for parking if you could park on the street for free? Well, because you would have to drive around the block and find that on-street parking, or have parking immediately across the street from your house. Lisa Lettieri, to allow for retail options, will a kitchen exhaust be incorporated into the proposed plan to go straight up to exhaust at the roof? I don't have the answer to that question, Lisa, but I understand it because you want it to be ready-made for that restaurant. And I'll have to check with the architects, and we'll put that on the list for next time.
It's a good thing to put on the list because of where the building is, you're not going to be able to exhaust out.
Right, right. So we'll definitely look at that, and I'll get back to you guys at the next meeting. Nate Hurdo, if people were residents living in apartments, they would still be able to apply for permits impacting existing parking capacity. Well, Nate, once again, I'm not aware of any residential permit parking district in this area, and I could be wrong. I'm trying to remember, but I don't think there is one because they typically do it where you are. I think, I don't know. Can anyone tell me, is there residential permit parking here?
No,
Okay.
Oh, in that
So we would
location.
be treated the same as anyone in Delray. Lisa Quant, what are the depths of the balconies and above grade level open space? So go back to the exhibit, Chrissy. I think the setback. Let me ask. No, go to the, go to the site plan where it shows the balconies and the setback of the building there. So maybe there. So the setback at that, where you see that green perimeter is 10 feet. And I believe the balconies are 8 feet.
but there's no balconies adjacent to the Stewart Avenue.
Oh, I'm sorry. Right. So no, there are none on the back there. There's none there, but on the Mount Vernon side and the Stewart Street side.
They're 8 feet.
Yeah. I believe they're 8 feet. Yes, correct. Okay. Okay, let me, hold on, I'm catching up here.
You're at Ainsley Cohen.
I'm sorry, I got lost for a second there.
Yeah, that's fine.
Please, could you make and present a rendering from the other direction on Stewart? Yes, we can do that for the next meeting. Jessica, is there anything in the rules to protect us from chains ending up in the retail space? I do not believe that the city can regulate what chain, what retail ends up in the space, whether it's restaurant or retail. I think Bonaventure has been successful with the retail tenants that they have in the southern block, but there's nothing that precludes that from happening, except for if it was, I guess, to require a special use permit.
Well, I
Skylar,
guess what the message to get out is that we've tried really hard to not have chains on the avenue.
understood. Yep. I was just directly answering that question.
Right, but
Yeah,
that's the
but there's a
message.
desire for local retail. Totally
Correct.
understand. Yep. Skylar Yost, are there any prospective tenants for the retail spaces yet? No, I'm not aware of any prospective retail tenants. Nate Hurdo, would you clarify your comment? Balconies looking over neighboring backyards. From the rendering, it looks like the third floor balconies are still in place. Can you take me back to the renderings? So the balconies are on the edges of the street. In other words, facing commercial, and facing commercial. So they're on the outside perimeter. Chrissy, go back to the elevations if you wouldn't mind. Go back to 16. I'm sorry, go to 17. So this is the back of the building. So Chrissy, if you could move your cursor, this is views 4. So you see here that facade right there that's facing the neighbors. If you look above on that right side, you'll see balconies on that top floor there. That was what we had the last time we met with you. And then go down to where we are now. We took those away.
So Kathy, because of the setback, the 10-foot setback of the third floor, do those residents have a terrace on that side that they can come out on and overlook the neighbors?
Go back. There is a terrace there. I'll have to double check. Oh, no, you got to go to the.
Is it a
There.
walkout terrace or
There is
is
a
it a
terrace
green?
there. And go back to the elevation. I think there are doors there. But let me double check.
Because that's essentially the same as a balcony. And it looks like there are.
I'm gonna have to go back and double check that, because even if you look at those upper windows, right, those are windows, not doors.
Well, look,
Yeah, those are their windows and those windows look awfully.
right, but
Yeah,
that,
no, so you're right, because there's no mutton in the windows on the bottom, so those may be doors. Let me go back and look at that, but I understand your comment.
exactly, that Chrissy's got it exactly what I'm asking, because those have access to essentially a terrace, which is. the
Yeah, and we
same as a
may, yeah,
balcony.
that may be, we may have kept that for them to be able to use that terrace.
Okay,
But they're not balconies. The concern before was the balconies, but
I know, but it's, the concern is people coming out and hanging out a terrace that's overlooking the neighbor.
There's
understand.
even a railing going all the way across, it looks like.
Yeah,
Replaced it with a railing. Yeah.
okay, understood. I don't have an answer to that because I'll have to go back and look at that. Chrissy, I'm seeing something on your screen. Okay, can you close that so I can get back to the chat? So our intention was to remove all the balconies that were facing the neighbors on that backside, but as you mentioned, there is that. What is your citation for your claim redevelopment that everyone wants? I think I said redevelopment that everyone wanted under the plan. The plan calls for redevelopment of this block. I understand this is Brian Mahar. I understand some people would just like everything to stay the same, just like they wanted warehouses on the waterfront to stay the same. But luckily redevelopment happened and it made for a better pedestrian retail 24/7 activity. And so that's what we're hoping to do here. And I think that that's what the plan encouraged. So I understand and do not mean to state that everybody wants redevelopment. Skylar Yost, the current building is terrible. Can't wait for there to be retail connecting the northern stretch of the avenue. Any enhancements to the crosswalks to the parking? We are looking at those crosswalks to the parking with the city in our design to make sure that if you are disabled, that you have good access across there. Because if you're familiar with the church lot, there's a big transformer that sits in that kind of nub where the two streets come together. And so we are looking at making sure that we have detectable warning strips and that that crosswalk works for people getting from our side of the block over to 2401. We've proposed a solution in our plans, and I'm sure staff will review that and get back to us.
Yeah, and if I could add, those drawings are posted on the DRCA website if you want to look at it from a better development. It's illustrated pretty well on the civil engineering drawings.
Nate Hurdo, what is the current estimated contribution to the city's housing trust fund? I'm sorry, Nate, I haven't calculated that yet. I will be doing that with our next submission, because when we do our next submission, we're actually submitting application materials and we are submitting more detailed, like for instance, more detailed architecture and engineering. So I will probably calculate it the closer we get to the real applications. Skylar Yost, the south side is called Euler. That is true.
Yeah,
but
thanks,
yes,
Skylar.
it's a loop. Jeff Price, there are 2 tenant entrances, not one. I'm not sure what that is about. Corey Dockman, to the traffic problem question, there is not a crosswalk light crossing Mount Ida. So when the light is green, the pedestrians tend to stroll into the crosswalk, not realizing that traffic has a green light and the church blocks the view of anyone approaching. Okay, that's good feedback for us to have. Katie Waynick, thank you for the 20% stormwater reduction above the current requirement of net neutral. Great addition from the last presentation. Was there any consideration given to storm design above the 10-year storm? No, I don't think we've contemplated that. I think the only other thing we've done is increase the size of the pipe in Mount Ida from a 15-inch pipe to an 18-inch pipe. Ben, did I miss anything? You kind of
Nope.
leaned in. Okay.
You got it.
Okay.
And Kathy, I'll answer the next question because that's directed to me.
Yep.
And I did not promise any questions live. We were going through the chat and we're just trying to keep things going. We still have a lot to do. So anyway, I think Kathy's doing an excellent job by going through all the questions. So
I'm trying to get through them, but the more I answer, the more.
I know. That's why I don't want to keep you going. I mean, let's keep going. I think you're doing.
And I'm sorry, I look like I'm in a witness protection program somehow.
I'll put my
really dark.
I'll put my face back on.
Yeah, no, I don't know why my house is so dark tonight, but be that as it may. Katie Morse, Mount Ida is a mess and the turn onto Mount Ida from the Ave is confusing because it is a one-way towards the Ave. To turn onto Mount Ida, you turn onto Euler, that becomes Mount Ida after the church. It is a mess now as drivers have to make a U-turn. This will increase when 70 apartments and guests are now dropping off, hence the question of making Mount Ida a dead end and rename the loop around the church to reduce driver confusion. Oh, I understand now the question about making Mount Ida a dead end. I'm sorry, I wasn't following your point, obviously. So
And that's what I was trying to explain, when I got the street names, but I really think the design team in the city should look at how this traffic works in this area and come up with a better way to improve it.
Rod asked, why is the attorney moderating the chat? Rod, I'm
Again, that's for me.
not moderating anything. I'm reading every comment and question and answering it as though I was in a live meeting.
I think this has been very efficient. And so I think this has been great. So you're the one who has to answer the question, Kathy. So I think.
Patrick McNabb, great question. Isn't this a land use meeting? Skylar Yost, wow, guys, she's literally answering every single question. Tim Laderick, please, for efficiency, the attorney was asked to answer the questions that were submitted. Unless you believe your questions are more important than everyone else's, please be patient. Skylar Yost, thank you, Tim. Virginia Amos, leave her alone. Skylar says she is answering every question. Would you rather have someone pick and choose? Rod Cookrow, just different, Tim. Patrick McNabb, would the developer consider taking a walking tour of the building property to better understand the traffic flow issues on Mount Ida? Many responses provided this evening raised concerns that they may not fully understand the neighbor concerns. I certainly would be willing to do that, and I think my client would be willing to do that as well. Nate,
I think you'd be able to get
Okay.
someone from the land use committee to join you as well. So then that way,
So maybe,
all
maybe you guys can facilitate that, because I don't know, kind of.
yeah, we could do that.
Yeah.
Yep, we'd be happy to.
If not already clarified, would you confirm the following heights? The height of the building has increased to a roof height of 47 feet. No. 0, 10-inch increase from concept 1, 48-foot 6-inch parapet unmeasured in prior drawings, 53 feet 2 inches total structure height. To elevator shaft not previously noted in drawings. Okay, so there's a height to the main roof, and the height is measured from average site elevation. So there are different markers on the sections in the plans. And so let me see if I can pull it out. So the building has to be less than 45 feet. You look at the average site elevation, which is 2 feet 6 inches, and we are below the 45 feet. We are 44.6, I believe it is. And then there is a parapet, a 3-foot parapet does not count against building height. And then the mechanical equipment, the elevator that you're talking about, also does not count against building height. So we are in compliance, I think.
All right, I need to interrupt there because under the plan, it limits the height to 40 feet with buildings with a flat roof, and that includes the parapet.
It allows 45 feet if that upper level there's a provision in the plan. And if you look at 1800 Mount Vernon Avenue, that went to 45 feet as well.
Okay, can you tell me where that is? Because I
Sure.
tried to find that from Nathan. Can you tell me where that is?
I sure will. Hold on a second. It's on page 93.
Okay, I'll look it up. I don't want to slow you down.
Sure.
Thank you.
And on those heights, I understand how confusing that is, but you can look and see the average grade is the 2 foot 6 inch height. And you measure from there to the top of roof, and that's where you get your building height. The parapet can be 3 feet without being included, and the elevator. And that's for every building in the city of Alexandria is how it's measured. Skylar Yost, thank you, Christine. I'll look on the DRCA website. Gail, I think this format has been great. All questions are being answered. If someone has a new question, whoops, put it in the chat. Thanks, Land Use Committee, for organizing a really informative session. Rod Kukrow, the architecture. Take about why it is cookie cutter model a la Shirlington and not designed to be compatible with the historic design of Delray buildings. I think he's asking me to talk about that, but of course I don't agree with that comment. It picks up on the Art Deco vernacular that you find throughout Delray. It picks up on the retail patterns of the block to the south of us. We don't think it looks anything like Shirlington. And we actually think it has been improved based on feedback from the community from our last meeting as well as staff, and has really been broken down much better than it was in the past. Tim Laderick says it looks almost the same as the current building to me, except the extra levels. And that's all I see in the chat. So Lisa, I'm going to give it back to you to do what you all, whatever you guys want to do. Live questions or not, I'm okay with either.
No, this has been great. I mean, it's getting late, and the land use committee still has more to discuss. So I think Kathy, you've done a great job, you and your team, addressing our comments we know that we've kind of bumped you with a whole bunch of questions, and as they came along, ideally it'd be great to have them all come together at once so you could have them all. I mean, we're doing what we can to try to help with getting you all the information as it comes to us.
Well, and I appreciate that. As I mentioned, we did get, you all have given a lot of feedback, and you've had a lot of participation as you have here tonight. And I hope that most of you, I know all of you can't be convinced, but I hope most of you will understand that we did try to take your comments to heart. We did make changes to the plan. So similar to what you did the last time, looking at the new exhibits, we can forward a copy of this presentation to the Land Use Committee to share with everyone. And to the extent that you all have additional comments, you can provide them to us. And we can try and respond as we move forward. You know, as we said, kind of we keep changing and hopefully getting closer together. There may be some items that we just can't come to agreement on, and we'll have to take those to the Planning Commission and City Council, but we're certainly committed to trying to improve the building to address comments and concerns that have been made.
Okay, Kathy, have you reached out to the church and to the school, the PTA at the school?
I have not personally. I think my client has had conversations with the church. I'm not sure if there have been any conversations with the school, but we're certainly happy to do that.
Can you follow up on that and let us know?
Sure.
And if that hasn't happened, we'll make sure to invite them in the next, you know, for anybody that might join us. So.
And have you met directly with any of the neighbors affected?
No.
Okay. Does anybody else have any questions in the chat? If not, we'll,
I think we should close the meeting. Thank you, Nathan. And I didn't see whether Carson was here.
I don't think Carson's been on there.
Okay, all right, but thank you for joining. And anyone else that may have joined us from this.
Oh, Kathy, can you send us a PDF of the presentation so we could also post that on the website?
Oh, and I'm sorry. Chrissy just reminded me, we did have a virtual meeting. I apologize. Very early on, we had a virtual meeting with the Finkelsteins.
Okay.
So far, I forgot, that was with the concept one.
All right, so can you send us a PDF of the slides?
We sure can.
And we already posted the submission. And I would appreciate it if everybody would send comments through DRCA like we did last time. It's landuse@delraycitizen.net. And help us compile them, and we'll send them out to you. I thought that system worked well.
That worked well for us to be able to get all that feedback. And I think you were sending it to the city at the same time. So
Correct.
everyone had the benefit of those comments.
Right. So I thought that worked well. And if we could do that again, that would be appreciated.
Okay.
And I think that's it for off the top of my head.
Yes, thank you for everyone joining us tonight. It's just been great. Wonderful when all the neighbors get together and for a big project like this. So this is good.
All right.
All right.
Thanks so much.
All right. Good night, everybody.
Thank you, everybody.
Christine, we're still.
Yeah, the land use committee members, please stay on.